Hi everyone, we're taking a short break over the holidays so we can finish up production on our series about America's national parks. We'll be back in your feed on January 7th with a visit to stunning Glacier Bay National Park in southeast Alaska. There I learn how the trickles from a melting glacier turn into a flourishing ecosystem full of life. But in the meantime, I wanted to share an episode from a podcast I think you'll really like called How Wild. It's from our friends at KALW and the NPR network. The podcast explores the meaning of wilderness 100 years since the passage of the Wilderness Act of 1964. That law set aside areas within national parks and forests and other federal public lands for an extra level of protection. These wilderness areas have to be undeveloped and natural, and they have to have opportunities for primitive, unconfined recreation and solitude. But so much has changed since the passage of the Wilderness Act. In this episode of How Wild, host Marissa Ortega-Welch looks at solitude and what that means these days with so many people hitting the trails. Hope you enjoy. See you on January 7th.
Hello.
Morning.
Did you have a good sleep?
Yes, but it wasn't long enough.
My best friend Holly and I wanted to hike the John Muir Trail in California's Sierra Nevada.
The tickets go on sale at 7 a.m. my time.
Let's do it.
This is how a lot of overnight trips in wilderness begin these days, months in advance on a computer, specifically on the federal government's Recreation Reservation website.
Okay, so you want to log into rec.gov and go to Explore Available Permits.
Okay. Let's try overnight exiting Mount Whitney.
And then, so the day that's about to go on sale is July 30th. And then for 2 people.
It feels kind of like getting concert tickets because the most popular trails get snapped up immediately. And the John Muir Trail is incredibly popular.
Okay, wait, but it's about to turn 7. So, this is serious business. As soon as it turns 7, it's going to be wild.
That pun was not intentional. I'm very sorry.
And then, once it's in your cart, don't let it go.
Okay.
Okay, it's going to be in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, right in.
Not to be like back in my day, but back in my day, and we're not talking about that long ago, our backpacking trips didn't start like this. Only some of the most popular wilderness areas required permits, places like Yosemite or Olympic National Park. We'd just show up at the ranger station the day we wanted to start our hike with a few trip options in mind, see which permits were available, and set out on the trail. Lesser visited wilderness areas, we'd go right to the trailhead, fill out a form to register ourselves, and be on our way. On those trails, we'd maybe see a few people camping at the same lake as us, but we would also find stretches of trail where we'd be by ourselves. Now, with more people visiting wilderness areas, it seems like solitude is harder to come by. It certainly feels that way, having to set an alarm to snatch up this permit months in advance. And opportunities for solitude is something that's required in the Wilderness Act. So land managers have started switching to these permits reserved ahead of time online as a way to control the numbers. But these permits have trade-offs. I might get my solitude experience, but at what cost? At best, permits are annoying to get, and at worst, they can end up excluding people who already have a hard time getting into wilderness. What do we do about these trade-offs? And is everyone seeking solitude in the wilderness anyway? This is How Wild, a podcast about wilderness, how it's changing, and what that says about us as humans. Episode 4, Solitude.
I'm just standing in the woods, talking to myself.
It's the summer of 2023, and I'm at a trailhead entrance to the Maroon Bells Snowmass Wilderness in the White River National Forest outside Aspen, Colorado.
It's beautiful here. There's aspen. There's a creek. There's birds singing.
The Maroon Bells get their name from these dramatic reddish-purple mountains. The high alpine meadows here are gorgeous in the summer. In the fall, the aspen turns stunning gold.
Gonna bother backpackers. The opposite of Solitude is a journalist bothering you.
We're only about a 4-hour drive from Denver, and this is a really popular place for tourists. People come to day hike, but there's also a famous backpacking route called the Four Pass Loop.
Hi.
Hello.
Welcome to the wilderness.
I finally get my first backpackers.
Doing a story about the new permit system here?
Oh, yeah.
Can I ask you all a couple questions about it?
This year, for the first time, a permit is required to hike the loop.
Where are you heading right now?
We're heading up to Snowmass Mountain. So going up to the lake and camping there.
I wanted to come here because a few summers before, Holly and I hiked from this trailhead to Snowmass Lake, where these people are headed. And I was shocked at how many people were there. And remember, I'm from California, where most of our trails are pretty busy. These 4 hikers are from the Denver area.
And so do you all have a permit?
Yes.
Did you log on like at 8 a.m. the 6 months before kind of thing?
100%. We had it in our calendars. Everybody's on their computer. 8 a.m. Here we go.
Him and I did the 4-pass loop last year before we needed a permit.
And what was your experience like doing the 4-pass loop without a permit?
Perfect.
Yeah, it was great up until the lake because there was 10,000 people there. I mean, there were people who couldn't find camping spots at the lake. So I dig the permit from that just to kind of thin the herd a little bit. But then it's kind of a pain in the ass because you have to be very specific about which weekend you want.
Have a great time. Good luck summiting.
Ooh, I've got more backpackers to bug already.
I'm with KALW Public Radio, which is in San Francisco. So I'm just interviewing people about their experiences with permits.
Quickly.
Yes, quickly.
These 3 guys live in towns nearby and grew up hiking here.
How do you feel about the permit system?
Maybe it's a necessary evil.
It's probably a good thing, but it's a challenge to see these areas that are becoming really crowded and people from California coming out and enjoying all this stuff that we used to feel like was our own.
Fair enough. Point taken.
Anyone else?
Nope, I'm ready to start walking.
Cool.
Yeah.
Bye, guys. Thanks so much.
Remember, under the Wilderness Act, capital W wilderness areas like this one have to be untrammeled, undeveloped, natural, and have opportunities for solitude and primitive, unconfined recreation. And when I say Wilderness Act, what that means is it's a law. Congress passed it. The president signed it. So land managers who take care of these places have to make sure that the wilderness areas meet that law. When Holly and I were up at Snowmass Lake last year, where there were so many people we couldn't find a flat place to camp, a person could say there wasn't an opportunity for solitude, that the area was out of compliance with the Wilderness Act. To ensure solitude, land managers tend to all reach for the same tool in their tool belt, and that's permits. Later that morning, I head out with the district's Wilderness and Trails Program Manager, Katie Nelson, to check people's permits and answer questions about the new system. We're on the trail that's the main on-ramp to the 4-pass loop. It's a sunny summer day, and the trail is crowded with hikers starting and finishing their trips.
What's the challenge of stopping people? I'm usually so hungry. I've been thinking about hamburgers for like 2 days.
Katie is a consummate wilderness ranger. As we're hiking at a clip, she scoops down to pick up trash on the trail and then pockets it without missing a step.
Did you just pick up trash?
Yeah.
Her green Forest Service uniform kind of makes her a magnet.
Hi. Do you know how long the scenic loop is? I mean, do you have a recommendation between scenic loop, Crater Lake?
Well, it depends on how long you want to be out.
How much farther is that from the little drop-off point?
Somebody left a bottle. Should we just take it? A water bottle?
Yeah, it's on the ground.
She remains good-natured about all of it.
How's your day been?
Good.
What's the highlight?
Seeing the ducks.
Even though she's in the midst of what is arguably one of the hardest things for a wilderness area to do, change a long-standing policy. We get to a big wooden sign on the trail.
These are our new trailhead access signs with some, I think, pretty cool updates, including the information about the permit system in English and Spanish.
Katie and her team have been doing a lot of work to get ready for this moment, setting up the website, creating a welcome video, and sharing info with local groups.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, pretty good.
Looks like you had an adventure.
Oh, I have.
Yeah. Hey, Katie, I'm a ranger here.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, where'd you guys go?
There, how you
Camped at Snowmass Lake, and then we camped at East Fork.
Okay.
So we had 2 nights, 3 days hiking.
Did you do the 4-pass loop? Okay.
4-pass loop.
And how was the permit system for you?
I just got lucky last week, and somebody canceled their Snowmass Lake.
How was Snowmass Lake? How did the crowds compare last time to this time?
I don't think it was as crowded.
So that's a good thing. But yeah, there were 2 surface poopers on Snowmass Lake, and
He says surface pooper, which I guess means someone who didn't bury their poop properly, which is what you're supposed to do. I don't know if surface poopers is a technical term. I've never heard it before.
I was able to rebury one of them, but the other one, it was like, oh God, I really don't feel like picking up somebody else's toilet paper. And
Snowmass is really heavily impacted, so I'm really curious to see with the permit system if we see any changes.
Right.
Ranger Katie says this is the reality of these popular wilderness areas right now. There's just a ton of people visiting.
The 4-pass loop is a trip. We talked to people today and it's like the first trip they want to do, or people that it's their lifetime trip. And there's a reason why it's so popular, and it's because it's stunningly beautiful. It's world class. I think that's the tension, right, of an incredibly popular place. And there's a certain kind of limit to the ability of the landscape to withstand that.
The decision to require permits here didn't come easily. Katie says wilderness managers before her have been documenting an increase in visitation for decades. That's a trend across wilderness areas in general. Katie's team began exploring the possibility of implementing a permit system and solicited feedback from the public.
What we kind of heard through is hurry up, Forest Service, please, the Maroon Belt Snowmass Wilderness is begging for some protection, right?
People weren't just concerned about the lack of solitude. Katie says this goes beyond that.
Solitude or not, the resource impacts are unacceptable, right? We've seen campsites grow over time, and we've seen the vegetation become denuded. We literally have a place people call the poop willows.
I remember this from my trip with Holly. There was a stretch of willows along the lake that clearly everyone had been using for a bathroom. Super gross. Land managers talk about something called carrying capacity. It means the number of people that can be on a piece of land before the land becomes degraded. In the case of a place like Snowmass Lake, there's just only so many flat open spots for people to set up tents. If there's too many campers, people start spreading out and camping on places they shouldn't, which can kill plants in the process. So land managers use permits to ensure the natural conditions that are required in wilderness, while also making sure people have opportunities for solitude. But what is solitude exactly? I mean, it has a definition, see Merriam-Webster, but the feeling of solitude, that's going to differ from person to person.
Solitude of 100 years ago might be different than solitude of 100 years in the future. And right, solitude for me might look very different for you, for them.
And whether or not you even value solitude and what you perceive as crowded can often be cultural.
Solitude evokes loneliness for me because, let's face it, I'm from India and there are a lot of people there.
This is Aparna Rajagopal. She consults environmental organizations on diversity, equity, and inclusion justice work.
I just think of being alone. And for me, it's not a positive feeling. I kind of want to be with other people.
Aparna's family version of camping was 25 or 30 of her family members renting vans or RVs and caravanning out to a group site at a national park.
When we were a family camping, our neighboring campers would stare us down. They were pissed. They were not happy that there was a huge group of Indian people. The smells were probably one piece too. We cooked a lot of Indian food. We were loud, laughing. And so that was my cultural experience growing up.
Those camping trips were transformative for Aparna, and she wanted more. Later, she became a guide for the National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS, the org that helped develop what led to the leave no trace ethic, like pack out your waste and let nature's sounds prevail. And on trips, she taught those principles to kids, but
telling kids from, similar community-oriented cultures that they have to stay quiet didn't feel right for me.
A lot of times the kids were loud because they were just excited to be in a beautiful place. So this goes back to the question of who decided what's the appropriate way to experience nature.
Because if it is a group of immigrants or people of color who are engaging in these places in a way that doesn't feel like the right way, like not Solitude, loud, there's automatically assumption that they're not treating the place well.
The quote-unquote right way to be in wilderness, what we've been calling the John Muir version that a lot of people have adopted, is you should be alone in nature and be quiet, contemplative. You hear a lot of people say that nature is their church.
I think it makes me laugh, frankly, because, like, first of all, like, I don't know if people have been to, like, a Hindu temple, for example. I mean, it is loud, so... like, that doesn't translate to me. Like, and it excludes, even saying church, like, excludes so many of us who are not Christian and who don't go to Christian churches.
It's not wrong to call nature your church, but the language we use to talk about wilderness reveals the culture it came from, right?
As Americans or settlers were colonizing, usually we have tales of, like, the first few people who went and did the thing, and usually they're alone, like living in a cabin, and those stories and those people were glorified. And so then that became how we need to connect with nature.
She says, think about the book Walden.
That we, a lot of us were assigned. I was assigned in California schools for sure. Henry David Thoreau's book.
The famous book from the 1850s was about a guy living a simple life connected to nature in a cabin on Walden Pond in Massachusetts.
But the way he writes makes you think he was actually living very alone, in solitude. But he wasn't.
He actually had neighbors. There was a community of freed African Americans who were also living there. So from early on, Solitude is a story more than it's an actual reality. And that story goes in some dark directions. That's after a quick break. You see the headlines every summer, articles about the overcrowding in wilderness, how we're loving our parks to death. Aparna Rajagopal says those worries, unfortunately, have some very dark roots.
It starts with this idea of purity of nature.
It was the early 1900s, and some of the key figures in the conservation movement, like Teddy Roosevelt, who championed the national parks, Gifford Pinchot, who led the Forest Service, also believed in eugenics, the practice of promoting certain human traits in the gene pool. In this case, what we're talking about is promoting whiteness by making sure white people only reproduce with other white people, or promoting able-bodiedness by discouraging people with disabilities from having kids, discouraging or even sometimes forcibly sterilizing them. These eugenicists were also against immigration. They wanted to ban immigrants from countries which would come and muddy the gene pool of the U.S., supposedly. At this time, the U.S. was passing a bunch of super restrictive immigration laws.
They were really concerned around establishing a natural order and eliminating what they determined or deemed was unnatural.
This all weirdly extended to the environment. They wanted to maintain the natural order within animals and plants as well. These guys were super into saving the white race and saving California redwoods, saving them for white people. Why am I telling you this? Because today, when we worry about overcrowding in wilderness and loving our parks to death, we have to be careful we don't make the same mistakes as in the past, when some conservationists only worried about overcrowding by certain groups of people. This isn't ancient history, by the way. As recently as the 1990s, the Sierra Club was advocating for anti-immigration policies. Why was an environmental group getting involved in the immigration debate? Because it was framed like this: more people coming into this country means more people having an impact on the land. Ergo, we should restrict people from coming into this country. Aparna says today, when people complain that these places are too crowded,
then it seemed like the natural thing to do is let's just restrict access. Let's just increase fees. Let's just have really complex online reservation processes that a whole bunch of people can't access.
The takeaway from this story should absolutely not be supporting permits in wilderness makes you racist. But what I'm trying to bring up is, why did solitude become a value in wilderness in the first place? And how does this focus on solitude, or the supposed lack of solitude, end up restricting who gets to come to these wilderness areas?
Yeah, we don't really have evidence to support that there's less opportunities for solitude because solitude is a normative thing.
This is Will Rice. He's an assistant professor of wildland management at the University of Montana. He's done research to show that when people talk about the feeling of solitude in wilderness, it's based on a lot of factors. Whether or not you can hear other people, whether you can spread out and go somewhere else.
And it's this whole kind of soup of things that end up becoming this concept we call solitude.
So even if the number of people visiting a wilderness area is increasing, Will says it doesn't necessarily mean solitude is on the decline. Will and others' research has shown that a big factor that contributes to whether you feel like the trail is crowded has to do with the behavior of other people you run into on the trail. And that's good news in a way, because land managers can address these issues.
And say, hey, it's actually about the behavior of people. It's about the noise people are making. It's about the distance they're camping from one another. Those things managers can run with, right?
They can build campsite areas that are further apart. They can use signage that asks people to be more quiet or not litter.
I mean, there's a really dark side to this as well.
We've already talked about how people can police each other's behavior on the trail, and it often falls along racial lines. There's one study that shows white people are more likely to feel comfortable with the amount of people on the trail if the other people are also white. Plus, Will says when people perceive trails to be overcrowded, that's what leads to permit systems. Will did research on campgrounds that require advanced reservations online, and what he found is those reservations often end up favoring people who are higher income and white. That's because those people are more likely to be able to plan their vacations in advance, and they're more likely to be tech savvy enough to navigate these online systems, and have fast enough internet to snatch up the campsite at exactly the moment it becomes available. Plus, these reservations usually come with fees, so they have to be able to afford them. The trade-off of permits is why Will says we have to be careful about this claim that we're loving our parks to death.
Death is final. Death implies there's no coming back. I mean, loving our parks to death, I think it's just too strong of a word that really scares people. And as soon as we start talking about, hey, these things are going to die if we don't do something, you start pointing fingers at who's the problem. And all of a sudden, that's when we start talking about things like Bluetooth speakers and large group sizes and those sorts of things. And that's a somewhat dangerous narrative when it comes to the ability to use that to exclude people from our parks.
It's that same conversation I have with myself. I'm like, this is really hard stuff. I literally lose sleep over it because I'm like, the public trusts me to protect this place and I understand what it takes.
Back on the trail, Ranger Katie says another trade-off she loses sleep over is introducing permits means rangers have to enforce them.
Us approaching someone in the wilderness in uniform impacts them, right? Like, especially if you say, I am going into the mountains to just unload the pressure of the world. I'm out here, I'm unplugged, like I've forgotten about the world, and here's a uniform.
After weighing all these factors for years, Katie Nelson and her team decided that permits for a charismatic place like Snowmass Lake was the best option. After Holly and I camped there, we left the popular trail and headed out on a lesser-used route. After a night spent camping near the Poop Willows, we saw no one for 24 hours. So we got our solitude experience. But what's better for the wilderness itself? Is it worse to have a bunch of people concentrated at one lake, where people are camping on top of grasses and killing them in the process? Or is it worse to have people spread out, disperse their impact, so have less of an impact on one place, but a little impact all over the place? There's more science needed to figure this out.
The concept of public lands is like, in these places, people are part of it, right? I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's just like, that's what we've done here, is like, we accept that people are going to be in these spaces. And so then how do you do that, right? Like, how do you have people on the landscape and think about wildlife? How do you have people on the landscape and think about water quality and think about all these things you've identified? And I will just be the first to say, like, I think it's imperfect.
When I'm back alone, I run into some hikers who are just finishing a backpacking trip.
Hi.
How's it going?
Welcome home. Can I just ask you about your trip?
Sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Raina and Nathan are just coming back from camping at Snowmass Lake.
What'd you think?
Beautiful, gorgeous, high elevation, hard to breathe.
Raina's from the East Coast. Nathan's from Colorado.
So you'd been to Snowmass before. How did it compare before the permits to now?
Yeah, definitely different kind of system. When I first camped up here a couple years back, it felt more crowded.
They originally got permits to do a longer hike, but when they were up there and realized there was still snow on the mountain passes, they decided to change their plans.
So that was the one downside for me for the permit system is if you are up there and due to something, you need to change your plans. It's just one thing kind of inhibiting you from doing that.
I do like the feeling of solitude. I think it's a little bit of a conundrum too, because the permit system allows the trail system to be a little less crowded, the Snowmass Lake to not be maybe a complete zoo. But part of solitude for me too is kind of autonomy and the ability to make decisions on the fly. And the downside with the permit system is you don't really. It's harder to do that, right?
Yeah, he was upset about it.
Do you want to say more?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I go back and forth on because I see a lot of, disrespect or just maybe people not being thoughtful of being in nature. So in a lot of ways, I'm for the permit system because I just don't know how else to fix that. These places are getting loved to death, but there's a loss for me too of being.
I think it's a hard transition for you because you are used to just being able to go anywhere at any time, unrestricted. Yeah.
That's what's always kind of appealed about the West to me is, the wilderness is the wilderness and you go out and choose your own adventure. But kind of feels when you book a permit almost like booking a hotel sometimes. So, but c'est la vie.
Like Nathan, I'm having to grapple with this. If I really believe in these places as being for everyone, those of us that were used to fewer people need to get used to sharing. I also think about something Aparna Rajagopal said to me, that she's not seeking solitude and wilderness. She's seeking connection with the trees, the mountains, the creeks and lakes. She almost thinks about them as other people.
And sometimes, even if I'm technically alone, I'll talk to them. And so it never really feels like I'm in solitude. I'm in conversation with everything that's around me. And usually I like to be with other people as well, my loved ones.
I think about Holly. My main experience in wilderness isn't total solitude. It's with her on our trips every year as a way to connect and deepen our friendship.
Okay, I got one.
You got one?
I got one. I'm still in denial about it. Okay, proceed to cart. Oh my God, is this actually going to work?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Oh.
Okay, payment confirmed, receipt generated, order complete. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh my God, seriously?
Yeah.
We have a permit.
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes. How many years have we been talking about this permit?
Yeah, I know. I can't believe it. I really was doubtful. I mean, you saw how fast it went.
Do we want to do this trail? There's going to be so
I know.
many people.
The Wilderness Act says wilderness is a place for primitive recreation. But how primitive are our backpacking trips if we bring our phones with us on the trail? That's on the next episode of How Wild. Make sure your phone is charged. How Wild is created and executive produced by me, Marissa Ortega-Welch. It's edited by Lisa Morehouse. Additional editing and sound design by Gabe Graben. Partnership building by Shireen Adel. Fact-checking by Mark Armeo. It's produced in partnership with KALW Public Media and distributed by NPR. And made possible with support from California Humanities, a partner of the NEH. This podcast is produced in Oakland, California, on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ohlone. Learn more about the Indigenous communities where you live at native-land.ca.